welcome to our online marriage retreat from Deeper Walk International. My name is Nik Harrang, and I'm the Director of Operations here at Deeper Walk, and joined by my lovely wife, Christy. And we are excited to be participating with you in this online marriage retreat. We know we have a bunch of people that are able to join live tonight and tomorrow night, and some of you are going to catch the after recordings. And so we're just grateful that you are choosing to invest in your marriage. It's been said that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence, but we found that the grass is actually greener where you water it, where you pull the weeds, where you fertilize it. With that bit of intentionality, you can have an incredible marriage as you do it God's way, with God's help. So we're just grateful that we get to learn together with you tonight and tomorrow night, and grateful to have Dr. Marcus Warner, President of Deeper Walk International, as our presenter tonight. How are you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing well. We've got I'm here in Indiana, they're out in California. It's like, I don't know if you'll ever hear in the background, but they're building a neighborhood right next door to me. There's heavy machinery going in the background. So anyway, I'm happy to be with you tonight.
Wow, well, we're glad you're here. And we have a warm-up question for you tonight before we jump into our first session. And the first warm-up question is, what's something that made you smile today? We're going to give you about a minute each to share with your spouse and have them share with you something that made you smile. It might take a moment to think of that. And as you do, just think, did it affect your body? Did it bring a smile to your face? Or did it, give you a warm feeling inside? So take a moment and share that with one another. All right, I think we're ready for our next question. Just giving you guys a chance to warm up as husband and wife, and this is a fun one. Take just a few minutes to describe a memory when you were dating that let you know you seriously liked this person you married. Go ahead and share with each other for a couple of minutes. Yeah, and actually we're gonna just go ahead and share briefly. I remember when we weren't quite officially dating, but we were at a campus ministry training school, and we somehow ended up sitting by each other by chance, as it were, many, many times during meal times. And just remember our wide-ranging discussions and theological discussions, which really spoke my love language. So I was like, man, this girl is amazing. I got to get to know her more.
Yeah, I was thinking about the same thing. We had lots of times talking at dinner where we were just honed in on each other and forgot everyone else was around. Although I think one of my favorite times when I knew I really liked you was when we were at the Santa Monica Pier and we were on a Ferris wheel, and he was very uncomfortable because he does not like heights. And I thought he was adorable.
Yeah, okay, well now it's your turn. So take a couple of minutes and share a memory when you were dating that let you know you really like this person. Okay, well, we have a great couple of hours tonight as Dr. Warner is going to take us into our first two sessions. And then tomorrow night, for those of you joining live, we have sessions 3, 4, and 5. So tonight is from 7 to 9 Eastern time. Tomorrow we'll begin at 6 Eastern and go until 9. And we will have some breaks after each session and some opportunities to interact with your spouse. And just really glad that you can join us, glad that you can invest in your marriage, and glad that we could grow together with you. So, Dr. Warner.
Unmute. I keep forgetting. All right, here we are. Thank you so much, Nick. And Christy, thank you for joining us. I know you've got a family to take care of, so thank you for stepping in. For those of you who are wondering who this beautiful model is in this picture, that is my lovely wife, Brenda, back when we were dating. So that was kind of my reminder of when we first fell in love. It was fun. So we are, I wanted to introduce you to a few of Deeper Walk's ministry partners as we get going, because you'll recognize some of them get mentioned throughout the way. Thrive Today is Chris and Jen Corsi, and they do the relational training based on brain science, inspired by Dr. Jim Wilder. Focus on the Family is a new ministry partner. In fact, for people who are looking for counseling for marriage and family issues, two of our biggest recommendations are Bob Harden in the Seattle area, who does some Zoom counseling as well, and Focus on the Family has just recently become a partner with us in that regard as well. Freedom in Christ Ministry, started by Dr. Neil T. Anderson. My father was on staff with them for many years. You'll see us reference their material throughout this. And then Life Model Works, where Dr. Jim Wilder is the resident neurotheologian. And Jim and I wrote the book together, Rare Leadership, as well as The Solution of Choice, and continue to partner together on other materials. So just wanted you to know, who these people are. We're all separate organizations, but you see a lot of overlap in terms of communicating principles and concepts. So we're going to dive into session 1 now. And session number 1 is just titled, Why Marriage Can Be So Hard. I mean, when we got married, none of us thought, I'm going to marry this person because I think I'll be more miserable with them than without them. And yet, how many marriages end in divorce? How many marriages end where you just almost can't stand this person, or you have moments in your marriage where you're wondering, why did I do this, right? And we all have those. Even Brenda and I have had those moments. I mean, she can tell you about times she was seriously thinking about moving back with her mom and dad. What in the world have I got myself into? You know, we all get there. It's like marriage can be hard. It can be, and we want to take a little bit of a dive into why is this so hard. So we call this the powder keg principle. If I were to ask you, what are the top 3 problems in marriage? Right, there's a lot of surveys that have asked this question. And according to most of the surveys I've seen, the top 3 problems in marriage are communication, money, and sex. And that is, there's something off with the sex. You know, it's either not happening, or there's been pornography, or there's something that's gone off there. When I talked to a divorce attorney once and I said, what's the #1 reason that you've seen that people get divorced? He said, it's money. No, hands down, it's disagreements over money. And I'm like, why do you think that is? He said, because money reflects values, what's important to me. And so you go to a lot of marriage retreats, and what they do is they talk about those top 3 things. It's like, let's help give you tools for communication. Let's talk about how to handle your money. Let's talk about your sex life. And that becomes the retreat or the seminar. And what I found is that while those things are important, we do have some tips on those things along the way. What I found is that below the surface, there are deeper level issues at play. And we need to understand those deeper level issues. It's like the machine underneath the surface that's driving the problems with these things. Because, you know, let's face it, most of us, when we first got married, those weren't issues, but along the way, they became problems. It's like you heard Nick and Christy saying that what bonded them together was how well they talked. You know, they could just talk and talk and talk and talk. Well, Brenda and I were the same way, right? We could talk for hours about things, but somehow, you know, when you get married, all of a sudden you lose this ability to communicate. It's like, what's going on there? Why does this happen? So we want to take a deeper dive and try to understand what we call the powder keg principle. Now, the powder keg principle is something like this, and that's the idea that down inside my gut, I've got this powder keg. And this powder keg is where I keep all of my issues. Now, when I first got married to Brenda, I didn't think I had any issues. I thought I came from a great family. I thought she came from a great family. I thought that, you know, everything was going to be fine. In fact, so did other people. Our pastor was like, oh, you guys don't need premarital counseling. You guys come from great families. This will all be fine. And so I went in there thinking, yeah, this is going to be fine. Well, honestly, the first trigger came on the honeymoon. And Brenda and I, it was kind of a cool story in that one of the ways I sensed God's leading to marry Brenda was that I was at a pastor's retreat, and I was one of the only single pastors there. And Delta Airlines was giving away 2 free tickets anywhere they flew in the continental United States. And so at the end of this marriage seminar, they're pulling a name out of the hat for these 2 free tickets, and they drew my name. And I remember I went back, and Brenda and I were dating at the time, and I was talking about going to see a college football game with my best friend. And she said, if we get married and we don't use those tickets, I'm going to be upset. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So it was kind of fun. God supplied in that way for us to have a nice honeymoon and go someplace nicer, given these free tickets. And it didn't take long after that to realize, yeah, this is God's plan for us. But on that honeymoon, I remember the first trigger, and it was kind of interesting because what happened was that Brenda said to me, simply, we left the hotel room, we were getting in a car to go someplace, and she said, do you have the keys? Now, it's an innocent question, right? Do you have the keys? But something about that question, like it hit a button, And it triggered this boom explosion in me, right? It hit the button and it triggered something in me. And I didn't like erupt in rage or anger, but something inside snapped and changed. And all of a sudden I looked at her different and I was like, who is she to ask me a question like that? Of course I've got the keys. Does she think I'm an idiot or something? And it was like, wow, where did this big reaction come from? And at that point, what I needed wasn't like really good communication tools and really good this and that. I needed to recognize that what had happened was I had just gotten triggered, and the switch in my brain that keeps my relational self present had gone off, and my relational self had gone offline. The part of my brain that remembers who I am and it's how it's like me to act went offline. And I was in, I was already spiraling. It was like just the second day of our honeymoon. And that was a harbinger of things to come. Well, along the way, as we began looking into this, like what's going on here? Why is this so hard? Why do things like that happen? I look at it this way, and that is, if you unpack the powder keg, if you take the lid off of the powder keg and look inside, you're going to find some things. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. But what most of us do is, because we recognize that there are times when it's just a tone of voice or something the other person says triggers us, and we get big emotions that we didn't have just a minute ago. The simple answer to that is, well, I was fine a minute ago. They're the ones who changed the dynamic. It must be their fault, right? That's how we tend to think. I was fine. You're the one who spoke. It must be your fault that I feel the way that I do right now. Instead of realizing that what they did actually, pushed a button that triggered something in me that was in there to get triggered. So I got two options. I can either try to avoid ever getting triggered, and good luck on that. But you can try to avoid ever getting triggered in your marriage, or you can take the lid off of this powder keg, take a look inside and see what's going on. That's what we want to encourage you to do as we get going through this. So as we go through our weekend together here, I'm going to be introducing you to ways of dealing with some of the problem areas in marriage, and then also ways of how to grow more joy in your marriage. So some of you know that Chris Corsi and I wrote the book, The 4 Habits of Joy-Filled Marriages. This is not simply a 4 Habits seminar. We've got that seminar. You can get it online. You can get the book, but we will be talking that in our last session. Before that, we're going to be talking about some of these things that cause problems in our marriage and how do we resolve some of those problems. So the first question I ask is, are there wounds in my past that have taught me lies that have led to vows that are impacting my marriage? So that's the question. Are there wounds in my past that have taught me lies that have led to vows that are impacting my marriage? And when I looked at myself, what I realized is the answer was yes. Right? The answer for me was yes. And that is, the wound from my case was, I got to say, my mother's a great person. She passed away several years ago. She's not a bad person, but I had some mother wound issues, okay? And one of them had to do with the fact that she was raised in a very difficult family. I mean, she had an extremely angry father. Their parents ended up divorced back in the 1940s when that didn't happen as often. And she grew up in an irreligious home and didn't get a lot of training. So my mom never got her emotions validated as a child. As a result, she wasn't very good at validating emotions when I would have them. And she had this habit of never apologizing for anything. And so I have this vivid memory when I began asking God, why am I getting triggered so much? Why do I have such a big issue here? And he took me back to a memory of when I was a little boy standing in our basement in front of the laundry. And I don't remember the issue anymore, but I can remember my mom looking down at me and feeling inside like she doesn't get it, she doesn't understand, she doesn't care, and she's never going to apologize, so I just have to take this. And so the lie that came in was, I have to keep my mouth shut and take it. So as a little boy, I remember that lie took root in that memory, and I made a vow in my flesh which said, when I get older, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut and I'm not going to take it, right? So that's a pretty powerful vow. And paired with that was a vow that said, I'm never going to let a woman control me. So you can imagine that wound, lie, vow pattern would not set you up for a really great marriage because I'm just sitting here with this powder keg inside, just waiting for Brenda to unsuspectingly push this button. And when she pushes this button without realizing it, what gets triggered up is, I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. I'm not going to take it anymore. No, yeah, and you inside you kind of swear at yourself. I'll be blank, blank, blank if I'm going to take this from anybody. Blah, blah, blah. And I turn into a different person. I get mad, I get angry, and all of a sudden out comes a completely different Marcus. And I didn't realize what was happening was that I was getting triggered, and that unresolved issues down in my powder keg were causing this. So guess what I did? I pointed the finger at her and said, well, this has to be her fault because I was fine a minute ago. Now I'm upset. She's the one who changed the dynamic. This is her fault. And so inside what happens is my mind begins to create a picture of her. My mind began creating a picture of her as somebody I couldn't trust, somebody I was afraid of, somebody who you had to walk on eggshells around because you never knew when she was going to do this thing that was going to cause an eruption and I was going to get triggered. And I never saw it as my problem. I always saw it as hers. So on the flip side of this, right, Brenda has some of these wound lie vow things in her life as well. And so there are things that I can do that trigger her. And I found out that the biggest thing I could do to trigger Brenda was to not pursue her and not come, not to initiate. She often didn't feel seen and heard and understood by me. She didn't feel sought after and appreciated by me. And so she tended to feel like she was leftovers. Well, that triggered some things for her because she had a father who was gone a lot and was busy with work a lot. He was really great when he was present, but he just wasn't there a lot. And so she got married hoping, well, I'm going to have this guy who loves me, who's going to dote on me. I'm going to be the center of his world, and this is going to take care of all of these attachment pain issues that I have. And so what we found was we were triggering each other back and forth all the time, pushing this button, pushing that button. And I look at her and in my mind, I'm like, why is she pouting so much? Why is she so, what's wrong with her? I couldn't, it's like, I don't react like that. Why is she reacting like that? And you begin to understand that how I react to something isn't necessarily the definition of what is normal. And it's hard for some of us to realize. But what happens in a lot of marriages is I think of it as we come into marriage with a suitcase. Like I come into marriage with my suitcase and it's full of all of my baggage issues, and Brenda comes in with hers full of all her baggage issues. Only in our case, we're not bringing in a suitcase, we're bringing in a powder keg, right? And I come with my powder keg into this marriage with all of these wounds, lies, and vows that are packed inside. And as long as I don't get triggered, they stay dormant, right? They stay nicely contained inside this powder keg. There's no eruption, everything's good. But man, when that thing gets triggered and the powder keg goes off, just like that, I can turn into a different person. She can turn into a different person. And all of a sudden communication, which was easy a minute ago, becomes extremely difficult. And it's because communication is easy as long as both of us are untriggered and both of us are feeling like ourselves and acting like ourselves. But when either of us get triggered, communication gets hard. When both of us get triggered, communication becomes impossible. And so this has been one of those, that powder keg principle has been one of the important principles that I've had to come to grips with in the marriage, and beginning to recognize when I'm getting triggered and understand that this does not mean that she's a problem. This means there's something in me that is unhealed and needs some attention. And so I start looking to God more often, like, why am I reacting like this? Why is this happening in my life? Why am I, in fact, you can look at it this way. If you find yourself overreacting to something that your wife or your husband does, or you find yourself dramatically underreacting, like it should create a lot of emotion, but it's just nothing, right? Either of those is a sign that you've got a powder keg issue that is unresolved. So they can be opportunities, and they can become opportunities because when I get triggered and when, things go boom, or when things just flatline, either way, it is a sign to me that I need to go seek God and ask him, God, are there wounds, lies, and vows underneath here that have created this stronghold that's affecting my marriage? And it's undermining what we're trying to build here. So that rather than constantly looking at my wife and trying to figure out why she's the way she is, I'm looking more at myself and going, how do I lead a less triggered life? I want to have fewer triggers in my life. I want to have more capacity to act like myself. So when the explosion happens, this is what happens. The explosion happens when our strongholds get triggered, and that's when all the communication breaks down. And it's because there's like this relational switch in our brain and it goes off. And the idea is when the switch is on, then the part of my brain that remembers who I am and it finds it easy to be relational, when the switch is on, that's no problem. I act like me, I can be communicative, we can be relational, no problem. When I get triggered, right, when a button gets pushed, powder keg goes off, this switch goes off. And when this switch goes off, I lose access to the part of my brain that remembers who I am and how it's like me to act. And as a result, I turn into somebody else. And I did an experiment one time in our marriage. I'm like, what does it take? What does it take for me to get triggered to where I will just completely shut down and stop talking and lose my ability to communicate, lose my ability to act like myself? What does it take? And what I found was all it took was a tone of voice. That when Brenda used a certain tone of voice, it was enough to trigger me into complete shutdown. Because that tone of voice, what it did is it reminded me of criticism. It felt like I was being shamed, I was being criticized, and it triggered this lie that, you just have to shut up and take it. And I would just shut down. And then, and I would shut down until I got angry enough that when I did talk, I would say things that were unkind and I would say things that would hurt her. And now we had an even bigger problem to work through. So this is kind of a basic model of how that takes place. Now, when this happens, it doesn't take very many of these trigger moments, very many of these button pushing moments and explosions for for something we call the button dance to develop. Now, the button dance is an expression I coined to describe what happens when my buttons get pushed and the powder keg explodes. And the first thing that happens is it triggers eruptions. And so it's like you're dancing close and you're like, oh, I love you. I never want to be away from you. I hope we're this close forever. And then all of a sudden somebody pushes a button, there's an explosion, right? When that explosion goes off, the first thing that happens is I now have fear. I'm like, who are you, right? Who are you and what happened to the person I married? Where did that person go? And why, what just happened here? I don't understand. And so we now begin to have a little bit of fear about this person that says, I don't know what just happened. I don't understand why that pushed your buttons. I don't understand why that pushed my buttons. I don't understand who pushed whose buttons here. I just know somebody's buttons got pushed, something blew up, and I don't like it, and I'm now a little bit afraid of you. So we're not going to get divorced. We're going to stay in marriage. But now what happens is there is now distance between us because I'm walking on eggshells around you a little bit more than I did before. And so we're still together, but it's like instead of dancing cheek to cheek, we're dancing, in opposite corners. Like I'll be over here, you'll be over here, and we'll be okay. And it's not a pretty dance. And I realized I was a senior pastor, and I thought I had a pretty good marriage. And I remember going out to started to institute date nights, just so we'd have an even better marriage. And it was really an eye-opener for me because our first 3 date nights ended in fights. And I couldn't understand it. And all of a sudden I began to realize that I was so focused on ministry that Brenda just felt like she was getting scraps and she was getting the leftovers, that she was not getting the attention from me that she craved. And this was a big enough issue. But on top of that, that was her key trigger issue too. It's like she got married so she wouldn't have to feel that and experience that. And now she was married to somebody who was so focused on all the issues at the church and so focused on all the problems of the people at the church that, she often felt like she was just getting the leftovers. And then she would want to do things that I wouldn't want to do. And before you knew it, it's like we were in the middle of a really major button dance. And it was about that point that we decided we were going to go to a Christian counselor. And we went and got my friend Jeff Bacone, who runs the Indiana Biblical Counseling Center, has been a lifelong partner of Deeper Walk. And he met with us and was able to discern a few things and point out some of these wound lie vow patterns in my life, help me understand Brenda more. She understood me a little bit more, and it was really helpful. And since then, I've often looked at it this way, like as a leader of an organization, I get coaching. I get a lot of coaching. I've had personal, life coaching. I've had leadership coaching. I have weekly meetings with guys who coach me through things that we do. I'm like, if I put that much time into my leadership coach, getting coaching and leadership, why wouldn't I put that kind of time into my marriage? Right? Why wouldn't I get marriage coaching? Right? And that's kind of what I look at what you're doing here. By coming, the very fact that you are attending this retreat says you are on board with the idea that getting input into your marriage is a good thing, that having a marriage coach is a good idea. So I did the same thing when I was in sports. I had lots of coaches. I got help with exercise and fitness. I got help with, just skill training and things like this. And I'm like, it makes a lot of sense that if I want to get better at anything, I need a coach. If I want to get better at my marriage, you need some marriage coaching. And so, we did some of that. And it was about that time too, that I was discovering Dr. Jim Wilder, the life model, brain science, and all of these things that I didn't know, I didn't grow up with. And so God was kind of bringing all of them together in my life at the same time to help us. And if you talk to Brenda today, she said, understanding the brain science here, understanding joy, the importance of joy, the relational connectedness, all those things made a huge difference in our marriage. So we will be talking about that throughout our time together. So the powder keg principle, right? I got a powder keg inside. It erupts now and then. When it erupts, it initiates the button dance. And the button dance creates the joy gap. And a joy gap is simply the amount of time. It is the amount of time between moments of shared joy. Now, this was not something that was on my radar when I first got married. I fear I was a little bit more like the guy who said, I told you I loved you when we got married. If anything changes, I'll let you know. I had a little bit of that in me. I didn't realize that there was a need on a daily, in fact, multiple times a day, for there to be intentional connection that created a moment of joy where we were just happy to be together. So joy, from a brain science perspective, is always relational. It means that the part of my brain that remembers who I am, the part of my brain that bonds and attaches relationally with other people, that part of my brain comes alive with joy because of you, right? So if I'm feeling joy, it's because I'm having a relational experience in my brain. Now, a person doesn't always have to be present for me to have a joyful relational experience with them. Sometimes just thinking about a person can make you smile and make you happy. But what happens over time is that this person that you married, it used to be that just thinking about them would make you smile and light up and you'd have a joy moment just thinking about them. But you have enough of these button pushing powder keg explosions and the button dance gets deep enough. And next thing you know, you don't have a lot of motivation to share joy with this person. And that joy gap starts getting wider, and the wider the joy gap gets, the easier it is for the buttons to get pushed, for avoidance to grow, for fear to grow. And before long, it's been, I've talked to people now and then in marriage counseling situations as a pastor, when people would say, I just woke up one morning and realized I wasn't in love anymore. I'm like, how in the world did that happen? And I realized that it doesn't happen in a moment. That is a result of a long joy gap. And it's been so long since they have felt joy in being together that they eventually just don't remember what it's like to feel joy with this person and realize that they're not. And that's what they mean by saying, I'm not in love anymore. Well, that is a curable problem, right? That is a curable problem because this feeling of being in love is essentially meaning this person brings me joy. And so part of what we want to do is deal with the problems that are causing the triggers and the eruptions, and resolve some of the things that cause the button dance to take place, and then begin training ourselves in skills that can close the joy gap so that we can begin, coming closer together. Now, I messed up the PowerPoint there. They were supposed to come like they were kissing, so I messed something up. But anyway, you get the idea. We want to shrink the joy gap through what we're doing in this exercises tonight. So as I kind of wrap up this opening session, I'm going to be giving you an exercise to do here in a moment. We'll take a break, let you do the exercise together, then we'll come back. But let me give you a peek at where we're heading. As most of you know, I use a lot of acrostics when I teach, and tonight is no different, right? We're going to talk about a new start for your marriage, START. And this represents the 5 principles that we're going to be walking through. about how do we shrink that joy gap? How do we grow the joy in our marriage? How do we resolve some of these, issues that have been created by the triggers in our lives? And so the first one is spirit. So the next session tonight, after we take our break, is going to be on the idea of what does it look like to walk in the spirit, and how does walking in the spirit versus walking in the flesh relate to our marriage? So that's going to be the next session. What does it look like to try to do marriage in the flesh, and what does it look like to do marriage in the spirit? Then tomorrow, when we come back, we're going to look at our first session is going to combine the next two. That is the battle for your mind. And the battle for your mind has to do with thought life that we develop. If you have enough eruptions in your marriage, after a while, you begin to think about this person in a certain way, and you begin developing a caricature in your mind about how you think about your husband or your wife. And if you're not careful, you start reacting to this caricature, and you're now in a relationship with the caricature in your mind and not in a relationship with the actual person you're married to. So we want to talk about that battle for your mind. And then we're going to talk about attacks. And when I mean attacks, we're going to how do we stop attacking each other, and how do we come together to attack the real enemy? Let's attack the actual adversary here, not one another. So we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at spiritual warfare in marriage and what we need to know about that. And then we're going to look at reconciliation, and that is forgiveness. How do we deal with forgiveness issues in our marriage? What are the things where reconciliation is needed? And then we're going to end on an up note. We're going to end on training and joy. How do we build more joy in our marriage? What are the skills that we need? What are some things? And then I'm going to give you a prescription for a date night on how to have a really great and effective date night. And we'll kind of wrap up with that tomorrow. So with that in mind, we're going to give you a break right now. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you right now to talk to each other about what the wounds, lies, and vows are in each other's lives, because it could trigger you and ruin the rest of the night. So let's not dive into that just kind of on our own right now. What I can instead is take this opportunity but ask God this question, and that is, as an individual, just yourself. So God, is there anything that I need to get right with you before we go to the next session? So that just, anything I need to clear up between you and me, that I need to clear up so that we can go on to this next session with an open heart and greater joy.